You're listening to All Marine Radio on the All Warrior Radio Network.
It's been a while, but Grant Newsham, who I have to say that I take full credit for Grant's fame, okay? Because if you if you search Grant Newsham's name, if somebody said, "Hey, you should have Grant Newsham on," you found him on All Marine Radio
Mhm.
because he did a lot of good work on it, and so it's always a pleasure to talk to him. Honestly, the guy who made me smart about the Pacific, and so we're gonna talk about that today. But before we get to the Pacific, um, give me your general thoughts on what you've seen so far, Grant. I mean, to me, it's been pretty astounding to watch. And this is what the United States is good at. We're good at big war, right? We're really good at big war, and so this is the sweet spot of what we
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that come after this, not so much, but this we do well. But what are your thoughts having watched this for the a little bit more than half a week?
Yeah. Well, it's about time, after 47 years, and you're my age, just about. And, we were around from the beginning of this. If you remember when the Ayatollah came back from France, where the Frenchies, gave him hospitality for a while and sent him back to Iran, and he took over. And for the last, since 1978, 79, we have had to deal with an Iran that has been killing us and has been trying to subvert the region, take it over, and it's just up to its elbows in blood. So I'm glad to see it. My start would be obviously the Beirut bombing when the Marine barracks got hit, but they also at some point the around 84 the Iranians grabbed a fellow named Bill Buckley, who was the CIA station chief in I think it was Beirut,
All right.
and they tortured him to death. And while they were doing it, they sent videos of it back to Langley so the Americans could watch it. And that's who we're dealing with. And they haven't changed one bit. You can go down the list of the murders they've committed against us, against the Israelis, blowing up the Jewish community center in Buenos Aires in '94 or so, killing 80 people at least. Just one thing after another. And then Iraq for all those years when they were providing the Iraqi terrorists with the hardware to the what explosively formed penetrators to kill and maim Americans for all those years. And you ask yourself, what has actually been done for them, done to them? Pretty much nothing. For all those years, you remember the Reagan administration with Bob McFarland. They sent the Iranians a cake shaped like a key and a Bible, and as a show of good faith, wanted to talk with them and sent them at least a couple thousand TOW missiles as part of the deal to get some hostages back. Well, of course they didn't, but that's pretty much been the nature of the U.S. approach to Iran, with a couple exceptions. This search for a so-called moderate Iranian, which is like going to, look for the smart Aggie, or going on a snipe hunt or something. It just doesn't exist. But we've convinced ourselves it is. It does. And you find that the first Trump administration did a good job and did apply real financial pressure on the Iranians. But that was 2016, so quite a ways after 1979. And then the Obama administration, you know, you think they were getting a kickback from the Iranians, handing over a ton of money. We're talking billions, thinking and cutting a deal with the Iranians so they were going to behave and be nice. And then the Biden administration doubled down on that, gave them even more money. Probably, they're making at least 50 billion a year with the oil sales that we allowed. So we've actually been funding this murder, for so long. And it's, as I, if you're my age, it's about time we played rough with them. And I'm glad to see it. Has, of course, only been 4 days. So, this would be about like, 4 days after World War II started, saying, well, was it finished yet? It's going to take a little while. So some patience is in order, but, we don't have 3 years to get it done. But this was long overdue. And we did, of course, last June, the Israelis and us did go after the Iranian nuclear facilities. and a 12-day war or so. I think they didn't stop it. Or I think they didn't. I think they stopped it too soon. And in this part of the world, that you had better win overwhelmingly, and a sign of conciliation or just not rubbing it in is taken as I don't know, insanity, and it's sign that we want to lose. And there's anything short of an outcome here that they talk about 1,000 years from now will be a failure. Already you're hearing parts of the U.S. commentariat and even on the both sides of the um, spectrum, calling for something called like an off ramp. Give reach a deal. Well, if you want to lose, do that. But this is something that once it started, it had to be finished, and that's the thing that I wonder about. And it involves also, a lot of killing, not destroying infrastructure, not destroying headquarters buildings and command and control sites, but it involves killing these people, particularly the Revolutionary Guards, the MOIS, their internal security, the Basij, the militia, the Mullahocracy. I mean, go after them and hound them. So they're gone. And as they talk about this 1,000 years from now, and anything short of that, I think will be actually a defeat. So we're really just getting started, but you have to be impressed at how they've opened it up. That sort of peeled open Iran when you're flying in daylight pretty much anywhere you want. Well, that's not bad. And you're doing it with through their Russian and Chinese made air defense systems. So we still are pretty good at what we do, and it's impressive to see. And it's and I'm not the guy in the ring, the guy who's doing all of this. So
Right.
I'm sort of limited in what will say. And I wish them all the best. I'm sure they've thought through this.
Right.
One concern is that you saw it in 2006 when the Israelis attacked Lebanon, is that the chief of staff of the Israeli military was an Air Force officer, an Air Force general, and he basically promised that they would win. They would defeat Hezbollah from the air. And they went through the entire target list, and they had these wonderful photos of just smoke coming up out of Beirut. And then after they'd gone through the list, apparently Hezbollah said, well, what else have you got? And at that point, the Israelis were flummoxed as to what to do. And I think that we've thought this through between now and then. And I like to think that our approach to this, as I said, is just getting started. We're taking down their really ability to shoot back at us. And at the same time, it does seem as though the Israelis are going after um, the people. They're killing some of the people who need killing. There's a lot of them, of course, and you have to take it down to the lowest level because it's a bit like removing the mafia from a neighborhood. You can't just shoot one or two of them. You've pretty much got to do the whole thing if you're expecting regular people to go out on the street and take back their neighborhood. So we've got a ways to go here, and I'm a little concerned that we may not finish this off. But I like to think that we will. I think they've got some good people running the show. I think General Kane comes across very well, and I've come
Yeah.
across Admiral Cooper before actually, and I think he's very good also.
Really?
And that was at least when I dealt with him. So, as I say, I hope we're thinking it through, and notice we're being pretty circumspect about it. You don't have the sort of the minute by minute accounts from embedded journalists and this sort of the scorekeeping that takes place every day. But so glad to see it happen. And if you can get rid of that Iranian regime, the world will be a much better place. And the Middle East, for the first time in our lifetimes, could actually stabilize and be a place that isn't this
Well,
just
after
hellhole.
I heard this began, I think it was about 2 in the morning when I saw the headline. I got up and I came into my studio and I got a TV monitor on um and I that I'll shut off. And sitting here watching it, but thinking just in your head, the entire time that we've been alive, there's never been peace in the
Mhm.
Middle East.
Yeah.
And I would, to me, if when we decided we were going to do this and to have it, I mean, for us, we've never had an ally like the Israelis since World War II. Somebody who right, wants to fight like we want to fight. Somebody who's good at it, and somebody who you're not dragging into the fight, and you've got to be very careful what you assign them, because they can't assume too much risk because they can't. That's not the Israelis, man. The Israelis are right there with us. And so, but the thought in my head was the Middle East as a peaceful place because the true great Satan is gone. And what does that mean for the whole Middle East? I mean, the billions in gross domestic product that's going to come out of places that have always been limited, peace and then and some kind of agreements with Israel, recognizing their right to exist. And so for the Israelis, since the mandate, this is the moment they fought for, right? So they don't need any encouragement. And so so when us thinking about that, how much oxygen this region has sucked out of the atmosphere because of one nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a quick question, where were you on October 23rd, 1983? Do you
I think
remember?
I think I was in Virginia. I'm pretty sure. And yeah, that was sort of a downer. And I wasn't in the Marines yet, but I was
I was in I
familiar
was
with the Marines.
I was
Yeah.
in I was in OCS.
Okay. Yeah.
And I remember Staff Sergeant Craig Timberlake walked in.
Oh yeah. He was a candidate when I was at OCS
Yeah,
in my but not platoon, the company.
right.
So yeah, he's a good guy.
So I went through right before you did, and
Yeah.
he became Major General Timberlake. But I
Hmm.
know I know him as Staff Sergeant Timberlake, and he was he was a nightmare, man. I'm not gonna lie to you. But um,
Yeah.
he walked in, and he looked around, and he said, "If there's any doubt in your mind that this is a no fuck around business, you better get that shit out of your head." And then he pointed at one of the racks, and he says, "See that rack?" And he said the name of the lieutenant that was killed in Beirut. He said
Yeah.
he was sleeping there a year ago, just so you know. And then you're watching him out of that pile pull guys that are wearing your red PT shorts and the uniform you wear. And it was for me, I mean, I'll never forget it. And as you said, I mean, long overdue. And I mean, I can't tell you how happy I was when they first kind of started talking about that this whole thing kicked off with the Israelis attacking. What was supposed to be a meeting, but I thought, well, yeah, but that guy's not there.
Hmm.
And then the next rumors you heard was he might have been there. And then when they said he's dead, I mean, I can't tell you how happy I was. And I've said before, but I know I'm going to have to answer for that, or maybe I won't. Maybe on Judgment Day, God will look at me and say, I'll give you a pass on that one.
Nah,
Uh,
I think he'll be. I think God will probably crack open a cold can of Schadenfreude and hand it to you.
the
It, it,
no,
yeah,
so I mean, but it is almost mind-boggling, to think of the implications of a peaceful Middle East for the region and for the rest of the world.
yeah.
Two,
You think, yeah, you think of that first, could be the first Trump administration, the Abraham Accords. Where did you ever imagine that?
no,
And it took a guy, a real estate man from Queens, to do what all of the perfume princes and the best and brightest from the Ivy League couldn't do. And that was just astonishing. And they didn't have time to really pursue it.
right,
But why not? If you can somehow get a favorable resolution in Iran, that if you ever, you can see the possibilities for the region,
right.
and that's something that probably hasn't ever been said about the
No,
Middle East.
I mean,
Possibilities for what exactly? But
Will Costantini said, "I'm hopeful," and this is the guy who routinely says we're all doomed,
mm,
right? And I think uh, was it you that coined the term cautiously pessimistic?
I think I did, but I heard it from somebody else. I'm
The
sure.
well, I
I've
mean,
got
it's
a
very
mind. I've got a minor bird kind of memory, so it
the
sits in there.
so, but I mean, and nobody's ever been optimistic about that part of the world
No.
because of Iran.
Mhm.
A big topic of discussion is was this necessary? I think I have an idea what your answer is, and is this justified? What would you say to people that are asking those questions?
Well, hell yeah, of course. And I say it. You don't say it light. Well, I do say it lightly because it's that easy to say.
Right.
And if you look at what the Iranian
Well, you know what? I
intentions
think
are,
that's the way you just said that. It is extremely easy to say, and you don't say it lightly. It comes from decades and decades and decades of watching this murderous nation destabilize a region, and then
Mhm.
that destabilization continually required an American presence over there. And so
Well,
I think that's a great way to articulate it.
yeah, and you see it also if you consider the Iranian regime's objectives, and they've always been very clear about that. And they're in the what you call the tools that they are putting together to be able to carry out those objectives, nuclear weapons and delivery systems. And that has been an engineering problem. That's all it is, just like with the North Koreans.
Right.
And when the time comes, if they could, and they had the nukes that were miniaturized and put onto long enough range missiles, that we would be on the receiving end of them. If and that's if you know, if we and the luckiest we could get is, well, they would leave us alone, that somehow we could intimidate them. But these are people who genuinely believe that shooting off a nuke into your great enemy's country and cities is a good thing. It's actually like religiously desirable. And if someone says they're going to kill me, and they're the kind of people who have a long track record of murder, that I'm have no problem at all stopping them. And if we had done this with North Korea in the mid 90s, for example, when we could have, we'd avoided so many of the problems that we face today from North Korea. So it just takes a little imagination to look into the future and understand the people that you're dealing with. And then something becomes very easy to do. And it's just the longer you wait, the harder it gets. And we've waited at least 35, 40 years to go after these people and to stop it. We could have stopped. The best chance I think we've had before this was in 2009 during the so-called Green Revolution, when there were big protests in Iran over a stolen election. And the regime was tottering. And all it would have taken, I think, was a kind word from the United States. The Obama administration refused to even do that. And once they didn't do it, the regime caught its breath and started shooting people. And they got Ericsson from Sweden to come in and help them with their electronic surveillance systems. Ericsson got a little embarrassed after a while. The Chinese have stepped in. So it's gotten so much harder for those people to try and overcome the regime. But we've had our chances before. We squandered all of them. But this is the best one we've ever had. And one hopes that it is taken to the finish. If it doesn't, then well, we're just gonna do it again, and it'll be
What
worse next
what
time.
in terms of justification, so you necessary in terms of justification, it was interesting. I was listening to Steve Witkoff talk, and he said when they sat down in January, the Iranian representative said, we have enough enriched uranium right now to make 11 nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
And so I want to ask you about, justify. And so, you hear that if we just blew up a bunch of your country, but and I want you to address this part of it in terms of justify. They're not afraid of us because we've never followed through on anything we said. We bluster, we talk shit, but at the end of the day, we don't do anything, right? And so to me, it's like, well, this is a great miscalculation. No, it's not. The guys that were relying on American behavior with the Iranians, they're not going to do anything at the end of this. They won't do it. They've never had the balls to do anything, right? And so
Yeah.
the real estate guy from Queens, will be judged a little bit different. Um, and so talk about justification. 11 nuclear weapons in the hands of the Iranians, right? And I've always said this, hey, when they get close, the Israelis are not going to ask us for permission.
Mhm.
We'll be informed. We're out the door. You know, I hope you come with us. But so talk about justification.
Well, you have to look forward, look ahead a little bit, and consider what these people could do and what they would do if they had sort of weapons of mass destruction. And if they could, they would shoot one into New York. Not that that would, you know, that might not be the worst thing, but some other part, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I'm joking, of course, but they would do
Of
it,
course.
or somewhere else in the Middle East, into Israel, into London. Once again, well, you'd find some place in Europe where
Yeah.
you wouldn't want it to happen, but they would do that, and it's a situation where you can't just sort of sit back and let those people, sort of jabber, because they have the
So
means
what
to
do you
kill
say,
us.
Grant? What do you say to people? Because you're an intel guy. What do you say to people who've watched all of this, right? And I
Mhm.
mean, they just killed somewhere between 35,000 and low estimates are 10 to 15,000. Where were where were all the protests about that?
Mhm. Yeah,
Right? Where were all the people, all those Persian people, all those Iranians that were dead? So do you even talk to that group? Because it doesn't seem like they're interested in rational discourse and historical example. It's just whatever Donald Trump wants, they're absolutely against. So in your whole argument about justification, do you waste your breath on that part of the, what do you call it, the chattering, you know, proletariat? Is that what you,
well, that'll
the
work,
ch
but
the
yeah,
chattering class, I think.
yeah, but there's really nothing you can say, in
Right.
any group of people who are not just dogmatic ideologues. And the correct word, as Charles Krauthammer coined, was he used Bush derangement syndrome. That's when it started. But his Trump derangement syndrome is literally a disease. I think when you don't have the decency to speak up for those 30,000 who were gunned down.
Right.
Uh, for what? Because they wanted to have consensual government. They didn't like what happened to females when they got taken by the Iranian regime. They wanted to stop it, and they got gunned down. So if you can't see anything wrong with that, just like you can't see anything wrong with Chinese concentration camps, black prisons, organized harvesting, organ harvesting. There's really nothing that you can say to those people, and I don't know that you really even bother. But you will find that people are sort of undecided, and have enough critical thinking left, and there you can make a case to them. And there are people, in the spectrum who will see, yeah, that's something bad. But it's tough, and it is perplexing, but it's always been the case. I think that before World War II, there was the hands-off Germany. You had the pro-German rallies in New York City at Madison Square Garden with Charles Lindbergh, active in those. And
And Joe Kennedy, right?
yeah,
He
yeah,
resigns as what,
yeah,
our ambassador to
yeah,
Great Britain, because of his position there. The
yeah.
yeah,
So,
no, it just
what do you do?
you
Yeah,
watch it, and you just sit there. And I shut it off because I can't listen to it. It's
yeah.
like, I mean, and for us, this is not a theoretical event for us.
Hmm.
We've been there. Those, you know, I know a guy who was pumping a corporal's heart, trying to with his hands, because one of those penetrators came through the Humvee,
Hmm.
right, hit this corporal right in the rib cage, ripped him open, and he's pumping his heart, trying to get him to a hospital at Tecado to see if they can stabilize him and maybe save his life. I mean, that's how those things are awful, right? Now and all that is on top of the barracks, okay, and then Kobar Towers, and you
Hmm.
go right down the list for us, and so to me, I don't like. So to me, justification, absolutely. And again, when that guy looks at Steve Witkoff, and Witkoff picks up the phone and calls the president and said, "Listen to what this guy he said to me." To me, it's like, all right, we're done, right? We're done, because that can't happen. The Now, next question for you: do you think that we can restrain ourselves from the quagmire of nation building. And I'll tack on to that. I watched all weekend. I had the last couple weeks have been awesome for me in terms of the American hockey team beats the Canadian hockey team in overtime. The American men's hockey team, those players, I mean, the things they said, I am so proud to be American. I'm so proud to represent this country. You're like, this is like, I'm in heaven right now because this is what heaven looks like to me. He's got his teeth, some of his teeth chipped
Yeah,
and bloody. And you're like, this is awesome, right? And, guys standing up and being guys, or at least the way I perceive men should be. Um, can we resist the temptation and that emotion that we all had? And then after the hockey team, this started, and then you saw the raw emotion of the Iranians that they posted on Facebook and all these social media platforms of them, their reactions to, him being killed, and then their celebrations around the world of this event. And if there's ever been a time that you really want to go do something, but do you think we can restrain ourselves from getting in the nation building business again? Because it's a bad business.
I think we can in this case. At least I'd like to think so. Well, for one thing, we don't have any ships to get the Marines to Iran, but that's another question.
Good point.
But I think we can, uh, and I hope there's more going on than we know about, and there always is. We're just some guys outside the arena, sort of have a sense of what's going on inside. What I'd like to see happen is. Uh, some part of the Iranian military, particularly the regular army, that's been humiliated and belittled and, sort of had their heads stuffed in the toilet every day by the Revolutionary Guards. Some part of that breaks loose and says enough's enough. And there's obviously some indications that the Kurds may be a factor in this. One, they've got a lot of weapons, and they like to fight. But that's
Well, I saw a report in the last 2 hours that said they had crossed the border. The Kurds had.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and, and so my opinion, very similar to yours in terms of, so the Kurds come across and they create a no-fly zone in the north where you can come to, right? Where you're not going to get touched. And then I'm not sure what else, but I think is there an Iranian patriot that is a general officer in the army, right? That has, you know, soldiers with weapons that is going to say, "Hey, I'm going to Tehran, and if this is how it ends, this is how it ends." And then you know that part of the world when it begins to tip, a landslide. I mean, it's almost like, just so everybody knows, people said, "Well, the Gulf states, they don't know." The Gulf states hate Iran. Right? The Gulf states are Arab states. They are Sunni. They hate the Iranians for everything they've done. And the Iranians were powerful military country in the region. I mean, supposedly MBS was was lobbying the president hard. You've got to do this now. And then they walk out in public and say, well, I hope it all works itself out peacefully. But in private, they're saying, no, you got to go. And then as soon as they got something shot at them, they're like, hey, we're in. And then they saw us and the Israelis laying the wood and they're like, oh, this is going to be good. We need to get in on it. But not so much at the start. I mean, they're not as bad as the Europeans, right? You can't use Diego Garcia. Are you fucking kidding me? And the dude in Spain. So to me, I have a very similar opinion that it's going to take some great Iranian patriot that's willing to risk his life and guarantee that he'll fight. And then maybe there's a tipping point in there where you see a lot of people go to that, and then they'll run and they'll leave.
I think would be the best case. I think
Yeah.
to have happened, and I like to think us or the Israelis have made some phone calls or done the necessary to try to give that sort of a thing a chance. And if you back it, you have to back it up, of course, with firepower that destroys anything that gets in their way. You have got to destroy, kill, humiliate the Revolutionary Guards and the internal security services and the mulatocracy and the militia. You got to do that right down to the neighborhood level. That's the only chance you have. And you're taking out this coercive infrastructure. And I say, not the buildings, that's easy, but the people. And you have got to do enough of that to get the psychological shift within Iran so that people who would be inclined to take on the regime just might do it. Because obviously a lot of them are gun shy at the moment after what just happened a month ago, when they did go out in the streets, when they were told, remember, by the president, US president, well, we're locked and loaded and go out and take over the government. And they went out and yikes, got roughed up very badly.
Right.
And so if we are going to have some boots on the ground and you want it to be Iranians, you've really got to give them an environment in which they can operate and survive. And the other guy is just getting, say, every time he sticks his head up, a JDAMS hits him. It has to be that thorough. And, I like to think we've done that, but it's not going to be
Well, so let me ask you,
that easy. Yeah.
I mean, the Israelis don't believe in a fair fight. I mean, if you watch everybody recalls the pager incident with the walkie-talkies. I mean, they don't believe in a fair fight. And so, I mean, to me, and this is the fight that they knew would come one day. This is the fight for their existence and ultimately for peace in the Middle East, which the people who went through the Holocaust, who then went to Israel, who then fought in every war that they've ever fought, they never, ever, they were beating people back. Well, this is to end it, right? To end it, for there actually to be a new day. So to me, very interesting. But I agree with you. It makes me nervous because we're agreeing too much. But they don't believe in a fair fight. They absolutely have people, in my opinion, in places that they've been speaking to and have told, like, we're going to kill all these guys. We're going to kill as many. We need your help. And at some point, there's going to be a tipping point, and we need you to be a part of it. Now, I don't think that's really optimistic because, I mean, Grant, you're a part of the Marine Corps Senate, right? So retired colonel. I mean, what we've seen the first few days is just getting rid of the anti-air stuff and to create a permissive environment so that we can lay the wood to all the other targets and especially the internal police of the nation, right? And the way that, because that's what needs to happen for the population or an army officer. Do you think that's an optimistic assessment, or do you think, oh, no. Look, we've seen this in different places because, I mean, that second gathering was generated because they can't talk on phones, right? Because we've done away with that. So now we've got to gather in order to elect somebody, right? And so I don't know that there'll be a third meeting though. So what do you do? Nothing? And so to me, do you think it's a really optimistic assessment, or in fact, give it a percentage? Zero is bad, 100% is good. Where do you think that vision is in terms of what's probable?
I would say 40% maybe, if we do it right. And you look at what the Israelis, for example, have done in Iran over the years, just astonishingly good intelligence work. Just incredible. That's in Iran. So I'd like to think that they have laid some of the groundwork. If they can create conditions where somebody who wants to take on the mullahs and the Revolutionary Guards will do it. And the Americans, I'm not sure how good our intelligence is there. I think we're good with electronic stuff. I'm not sure the CIA even knows how to spy anymore. But that said, we have a contribution to make, and obviously, and I think we're working with the Israelis on that. But I think there's a possibility of this. But it's going to take, as you said, once you've made it so we have free run of the place, and then you start hounding these people and killing them, and in large enough numbers. And there's no nice way to put it,
Right.
but it has to be. You have to present them with these undeniable facts. That they've lost and they have no chance. And there's a psychological game at stake here because the bad guys are they're going to want dig in their heels, try to hold on. And they'll do it as long as they can. So somehow you have got to make them leave. And you're probably not going to persuade them. But it has to be a case where, it is the world is ending for them. And if you do that, then I think you've got a pretty good chance because this society, there's obviously huge fissures. And they exploit those. And I think there is a possibility that the Iranians might turn out to be our boots on the ground. And almost by definition, anything that comes is better than what already exists. You hear that, well, we don't want we could end up with something worse. We don't want to upset the system. You hear that all the time. Well, how much worse could it be?
Well, and again,
Yeah.
this is what we should have done in Afghanistan. A punitive expedition. Go wreck the place and look at them and say, we have no interest. We don't do the Pottery Barn. Okay. So if you stack two bricks on top of each other that we don't like, we're coming back. It's like when Hezbollah shoots at the Israelis. The Israelis have a target list as long as your arm. Okay. And all's when they shoot, it allows the Israelis to go down and they just service every target on the list, right? They service every target on the list. And I mean, but you're already seeing signs that the Middle East has changed. And that was the president of Lebanon came out publicly and said, enough. Hezbollah will not conduct military operations from Lebanon. And you heard that and you're like, what?
Yeah. When was the last time when was the time that was ever said?
It was never said.
Like never?
Never. I mean, think about Lebanon becoming the beautiful Lebanese nation that it used to be. San Diego on the Mediterranean is what I heard Lebanon. I've never been to Beirut but I mean, it was supposedly this just absolutely breathtakingly beautiful place. And but it's been just war torn and shitty. And so let me ask you one more question about the Iran war, and then I want to talk about the Pacific. What I mean, as a Marine, as a military guy, as an intel guy, is there any part of this that you've looked at and say, "Wow, that's really impressive"?
I'd have to say all of it.
Yeah, no kidding.
When you think about it, it isn't like the Iranians didn't know we were coming. It isn't as if the Chinese haven't been giving them targeting information. And China's a Chinese-based intelligence ship that's been shadowing U.S. forces in the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea, and the Russians have been in on this as well. So they knew we were coming, and we still whapped them. And you've got to hand it to somebody. And then I'm not really a detailed guy, so I always think that whoever puts the air plan together for these things, man. If you think about it, to make it all work together and synchronize and that sort of thing, I'd slip him an extra 20 in his paycheck every couple of weeks for that. But it just in every respect so far, it's really been, just a textbook case for how to do things like that attack last June.
Well, and
the Maduro raid.
What do you think the Chinese who are trying to get into the business of power projection? We do it with ease. I mean, go halfway around the world, tank our bombers all the way over, all the way back. They never land anywhere. We don't lose anybody, and we essentially, wreck a bit of a nation, right? And then we do the Maduro thing. I mean, to me, if I were the Chinese and I wanted to get in the power projection business, you watch the Americans do it, and we've been doing it for so long, we don't even think about it. But other nations look at that and go, "You got to be kidding me, man!" And to do this on the other side of the planet, all the ships there, as you said, what is the ATO, the air tasking order, look like? What is it? They're flying 1,000 sorties a day. It's like this thick on a daily basis. And then you have the Israelis in there right with you, right, throwing blows like you are. And And it's just like, what do they think? So what do you think they think? Talk about the Chinese specifically.
Yeah, well, the Chinese have complained for a long time about not being able to protect their overseas interests. And around the turn of the 2000, the dictator of China ordered the PLA to be able to do this. They've known about this, they've complained about it. The PLA has been told to be able to protect overseas interests. They've made a lot of progress, actually, towards being able to operate at a distance. For example, they sent aircraft over to Egypt not long ago, it was last year, to do exercises with the Egyptian Air Force, including aerial refueling. They've sent ships and aircraft to Tanzania. Uh, they've done a lot of things with the Russians. They've sent Y-20s down to Tonga, a few years ago down to Solomon Islands. So they can do some of it. And they've been building refuelers, sustained replenishment ships, like proverbial pancakes coming out at a griddle at a volunteer fire department breakfast.
Right.
They're building the things you need, the hardware, the equipment to do it, and getting some of the access that you need around the world. But obviously, they're not there yet, and they know it. It bothers them. It embarrasses them. But that's their objective. And I think if you give them 10 years, we might be surprised at what we see them doing. And as it is now, if it was something closer to China, say within 500, 1,000 miles from the coast, they could project power. But beyond that, not so much yet. But they're putting the hardware together. You're seeing their aircraft carriers that last year were operating east of Guam, actually, and they're probably 20, 30 years ahead of where the experts all thought they would be in terms of aircraft carrier development. That's partly because Americans have helped them bridge that gap. But they always do everything pretty fast. So while they're not there yet and have a ways to go, they're coming, and they know what they need to do. For now, we've got an advantage, but for how much longer, I don't know. I'd say 5, 10 years. And then after that, we'll really have to start worrying, because they've identified the problem. They're going about addressing it.
I lied. I want to ask you one more question. The Davidson window. In some of the things as they tumbled through my head, if we don't have to have the military commitment in the Persian Gulf region because there's no threat over there anymore, right? I mean, that threat, I mean, we're not walking away from Iran until it's done, right? And so I don't believe that. I don't believe we will, right? So if they're not a threat anymore, and you don't need all those naval forces and the Air Force units we've had, that leaves one major threat. Again, relative to the Navy, and that is, so how does this change the calculus in the future relative to China? Is the Davidson window about to close because not because we got better, but because simply when these threats go away and we're able to mass more units in a smaller place, then that nobody anticipates. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think that could change the calculus and maybe so-called window open longer. I would say that just a little story that the Davidson window is actually there was something before it. It was called the Decade of Concern. And there was a fellow named Captain Jim Fennell, who was the head of intelligence at Pac Fleet, who's been doing China forever. And he said it was around 2012, 13 that China was getting ready for a war, and that he considered from 2020 to 2030 to be the time when it was the biggest danger or trouble in the Western Pacific, Taiwan, Japan, uh, somewhere around there. And he said this and got the White House very angry with him. And even some of the perfume princes thought that he was too provocative. And he was effectively forced to resign in 2015. And the White House, I'm told, hated him. It was the Obama administration. They ordered Harry Harris, the commander of Indo-PACOM, to get rid of him. And Harry Harris was glad to do it. And and so Jim lives in a little village in Switzerland now, and nobody has gone to apologize for him. And now every Tom, Dick, and Harry is saying, oh, the Chinese are a threat. And it's called the Davidson window. Well, it was actually Jim Fennell's Decade of Concern. And he was right about it all. And he was speaking up, but professionally. And that's what happened to him. That is how welcome any sort of warning that was being sounded was. Now, okay, that said, maybe one day someone will apologize, or even Admiral Davidson will say, well, it wasn't quite my idea. But I think that this could, what happens in Iran really could, you could go really well or perhaps really badly. And if, say, there's a favorable outcome and you do get a sort of like a nice regime in Iran, at that point, that's going to cause the Chinese to step back, I think, because this demonstration of American will, and the Chinese are always examining will of their intended victims, of their enemies. And they've got the demonstration that we're serious, we have backbone, and they've also demonstrated capabilities that are pretty impressive, especially when your Chinese air defense system doesn't seem to work very well. It's got to cause some second thoughts. So, and you're going to have what do you call it? Like, there's going to be a lot of people wanting in on this good deal. Like, you see the Gulf states that we were afraid were leaning towards China. Well, suddenly we see, well, now they're all in with the Americans and less in with the Chinese. So the Gulf Arabs, and they control a lot of oil. We control, if we control Venezuela's and Iran's, that a lot of this oil on which China depends is now kind of under the control or influence of the United States. Well, that's going to cause them to back off a bit. Additionally, just the momentum and the free world, and these the Europeans even sort of say, well, let's get on with a good thing, even though we don't like the Americans. That puts the Chinese in a very difficult position. They've lost their main proxy in the Middle East. They've been embarrassed. That relationship with the Russians just might change too. Now that Russian oil is worth more, and they may feel less willing to be dependent of the Chinese the way they are now. So I think you could, and the Americans, as you said, they've now got more resources to devote to Taiwan. And if you end the Ukraine business, you've got even more stuff to put on, not just Taiwan, but the Western Pacific, East Asia. So that could, I think, forestall some real problems with the Chinese. However, if we get bogged down, say the Iran fight doesn't go the way we would like, heavy casualties, the regime just digs in and it's not going anywhere, we get bogged down, that's going to cause some problems, because I think the Gulf Arabs will be thinking, well, we went all in with you now and look where we are. Let's cut a deal with China. The Europeans, they'll go after Mr. Trump. The domestic problems for Trump would be huge if that happens. And the Chinese like whoever would replace Trump, especially if it's a Democrat. So in that case, and you would see that nobody's very interested in another fight over Taiwan, at least in the US, because they've just got their fingers burned with Iran. At that point, for the Chinese, well, time to move. They could see it as a very attractive opportunity. So a lot does depend on how I think the Iran fight turns out. It could be very good, or it could be a lot less good than that, is my take on it. And the Chinese watch it very closely. So
The what haven't I asked you about either China or about the war in Iran that is on your mind?
good question. I don't know if you hang up, I'll think of about six things really quickly. But I think with the Chinese, that is a big one that you hear a lot that you've asked is how does Iran affect what the Chinese are going to do?
Right.
I don't think at the end of the day that it stops their objectives don't change. It's not going to turn them into a nice country, a nice place. or nor are they going to say, well, we don't really want global domination. We don't want to drive the Americans out of the region and then dominate the globe. That isn't going to change. That is the Chinese Communist Party's long-term objective. They'd like to get it quicker, but that's where they expect to end up. And while they've had real setbacks in Iran. We'll see if it stays as a setback. But Venezuela as well, that doesn't make them feel good. If Cuba goes under, that would be even better for us. And the Chinese would lose another platform in the region.
Do you think Cuba's dead man walking right now? A lot of people do.
I hope so. If we push it, I think it is. I think we've never had a better opportunity. And since Marco Rubio's the Secretary of State, I'd be inclined to bet on him on this one.
I'll tell you what, every person that the president has hired in a cabinet position, one of the things that must have been a requirement, you've got to be able to go out there and carry a tune in public, right? You got to be able to sing it and perform, because when it goes wrong, if we have, this is unfair, but Rex Tillerson, he was the CEO of Exxon, and then he was the head of the Boy Scouts also, and but he's just in public. He's like, so maybe he was a great choice, but Donald Trump learned from that. When you see Hegseth start in the morning and General Kane, who was very impressive too, then Marco Rubio comes out, then JD Vance comes out, and they just slay it, right? In this offensive of ideas, and everybody, this isn't justified. This is, you only went because, BB owns you.
Right.
He's Geppetto, right? You're his dancing chicken and all that stuff. And so it seems to me, but if Marco Rubio has his way, Cuba will be. Think about how fucked up Cuba is, and Mexico too, for that reason, for that matter. You're right next to the greatest economic engine in the world, and you can't figure it out.
No,
you can't figure it out.
No, it's but so I think even Mexico is behaving a little better now than they were. But
it's going to be very interesting there, right? After what they did, in killing that guy,
it is.
The narcos are like, hey, we paid for this country already. What do you mean you want it back?
Yeah,
and they're not having it. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens down there, because
But I think Cuba could go under and or could become free. Which be another thing that our entire lives, it's been what it is. I think that could happen. But the point is that the Chinese have had setbacks, but they're still operating everywhere, and they have a very good political warfare effort going worldwide. Not least, it's they bought up probably half of Capitol Hill in Washington. Fentanyl kills 800,000 Americans, and nobody does anything to China.
Right.
Well, they've bought some influence, and so, but that's so you have these setbacks, but it isn't as if the CCP is going to back off. And they're the Pacific Islands, the Chinese very effective, getting behind the first island chain and subverting local governments, creating pro-China constituencies. Latin America, they've done the same thing. To the Trump administration's credit, I've had some success against that with Panama, for instance.
Very
Ecuador and Peru. It's amazing how much this administration has done and has going at the same time. But Chinese political warfare and they see it as war. So it's effective, it's successful, it's just about everywhere. Pretty much has Canada wrapped up. You can imagine that. And that is how bad it is. And they haven't fired a shot. So you could get thumped in, say, Venezuela or Iran even, and have some trouble not finding enough oil and such like. But they've still got a lot going for them. And these are just a couple of nice victories that could have some real effects. But I think we've still got a fight on our hands with the PRC. It's that political warfare, and which really means using every aspect of national power to get what you want from your opponent, short of shooting. But we think that unless they're shooting, we're not at war. To the Chinese, the shooting's just the last part, if you even need it. And they're really good at that. We don't even seem to have a plan. We do some things that are like it now with the Trump administration, but at the end of the Biden administration, the guy at the State Department, whose job it should have been to do political warfare, was called before Congress, a committee, and asked, "Tell us about your political warfare scheme." And he said, "Can you define political warfare for me?" And that's how bad it is. And I'm not making this up.
Come
I swear, I
on, come
swear to
on,
God.
Grant,
No, I
stop,
swear. So
stop.
anyway, but that's it.
You know,
We have opportunity to
the
excel.
video of the what were the hearings when they drugged the mafia on TV the first time?
When they dragged
The mafia on TV for
the
Senator.
Valachi, the
What
whatever. Well, yeah, it was
was
the
it
Kennedy era.
the Kefauver?
Oh, yeah, Eastus Kefauver.
Yeah,
I think, yeah, that's it. I've heard about
yeah,
that.
Senator. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, in this case, the guy really didn't. I think this guy from the State Department. I
Really?
even asked, and this is a story. I asked. I was in Manila a couple of years ago at an event, and it was a big event. And one of the speakers was Admiral Paparo, commander of Indo-PACOM, and I should have known better, but I asked a question. I said,
Oh no.
"Well, yeah, I never do this, because I'm not a spring butt, but." That I did. And I asked him, well, could the Chinese have had a very effective political warfare campaign going on in Asia for the last 30 years? Could you tell us about our own political warfare efforts? And he looked at me, he just sort of stood there, and you knew he didn't know what I was talking about. And
Come
then
on, he did.
no, he didn't. And then he decided he didn't like me. And he says, well, we don't do political. He said, we don't do that. We do statecraft. And he came over and accused me of being a cynic, and he knew he didn't know what he was talking about. And not unfortunately, but on the stage was the head of the Philippine military and the Philippine defense minister. Both of these guys have PhDs in political warfare. But the point is that Admiral Paparo is not, and the military has not seen that as their thing, if they even know what it is. And so they would think, well, State Department does it. And State Department says, well, could you define it for me? We invented political warfare after World War II with George Kennan. And, we can sell people anything. We can sell leisure suits to people, for goodness sakes. And we can't sell the United States. So we say we have some opportunity to excel. And just a handful of guys who know the subject, we'd be in the game, but we're not even in it. And that's why, for example, we're losing places like Micronesia, where Marshall Islands came within one vote of de-recognizing Taiwan and going to China a couple of years ago. Palau's been under constant attack. This is just a couple examples. It's everywhere else in the Pacific, and that's just the Pacific. You see it in Africa with Diego Garcia, like you mentioned. There's a Chinese angle there, trying to get us out of really what is the equivalent of the Hawaiian Islands of the Indian Ocean in terms of basing. If you lose Diego Garcia, and it would be about like giving up Hawaii.
And you mean in terms of the strategic impact? And
that's right. Yeah, not Don Ho,
not the Hawaiian Islands.
No,
right?
I mean the Hawaiian bases. I'll put it that way. But that's about how bad it is, and the Chinese hand is in it so obviously.
Right.
And it's political warfare. They haven't fired a shot. So we might wake up, but I'm just pointing that out because
it helps to start winning, right? It helps instead of being a pathetic whelp of a nation that wrings its hands and makes strongly worded statements and then doesn't do shit. It helps to win a few times.
Use of force can be actually a form of political warfare.
Right.
You think about the psychological effects of that, and as you say, if people think you're a winner, well, you suddenly got a lot of friends who want to.
It's amazing how that happens.
I always knew you were going to win.
I always knew you were my friend.
Yeah,
you're right. You're in the continental United States?
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Oh, I have to write a book. I swear, but I have to write another book, and
So you've written, how many books have you written now?
including the first one.
Yeah.
One.
I've written
But,
2. I'm ahead of
oh,
you now.
oh man, I gotta hurry.
Exactly. I
I
hope you
gotta
feel like
hurry.
shit,
I
right?
do actually, I
If
do, but I
some
gotta
rube
hurry.
like me has 2, that
Yeah,
and
but
and
that, you know,
and
that
maybe I'll write a third. In fact, these are my 2 books right here. Yeah. The
oh
I
wow.
just I just published a children's book
Yeah, I know
about
that. Yeah.
how to live. Well, you Grant has sent me very gracious notes. I appreciate
Oh,
that.
this is good stuff. Your stuff, people are alive because of what you do.
It's praise.
Yeah. So,
And you know what I love about it most, Grant? I mean, it is. Um, I didn't learn it all in the Marine Corps, but I practiced it all the time,
mhm,
and it's our that children's book is if you really, it's not really a children's book, right?
yeah,
It could be read with anybody can read it, but it can't certainly can be read by a child. I hope it's read by parents with children who they can protect from trauma, right?
hmm,
But it's a story of what it is to be a Marine, right? And so in this whole, so you go through something traumatic, right? Before you put kids on medications or adults, and before you send them to forever therapy, I'm going to tell you that for 98% of the nation, there's an answer inside of you.
yeah,
And they're classical ideas: wisdom, to live with self-discipline, to live selflessly, to give to others, and then to transform your life. Those ideas are about as old as time. But we want to take a pill, right? And so to me, whether you're a child and can you imagine a grandparent when a child goes through something really difficult and they look at your grandchild and they say, you know, there's things I've gone through that really bother me. Can we talk about them? I mean, somebody who you revere like that, who says, look,
mm,
when you get sad, it's okay. You can't go through what you just went through without getting sad. So it's just those basic life skill things that you're not going to get over. You are going to struggle. When you struggle, you're normal. And to me, the Marine Corps represents that relentlessness in life. And this, if nobody else might believe that we actually think we can do the things that we think, but we believe it, so we don't give a shit. And so to me, that relentlessness, that kind of positive attitude about life, that's what those books are about. And so
yeah,
I'm, as you said, I mean, very humbling. And so
yeah.
you've
Good
got to write a
stuff.
second one so we can be tied for a while.
Well, the second one is I was asked to write it actually, and it's a
Oh.
novel. It's not like a fact book. So like if I need a regiment of flying monkeys, I can get one.
Well, you know what? The children's book was like that for me, right? The first book, right? Footnotes and
Yeah,
nonfiction. You have to be
yeah,
very careful. You
yeah.
quote somebody, you can only use so many words. And fiction, you just like you make it up, right?
It is helpful in that
It's,
regard. Yeah.
it's very
Okay.
helpful. It's very helpful. No, actually, there's just about everything in that book is a real life experience in my life.
Hmm.
And so for me, the children's book is a very personal book.
Yeah.
And it grows out of, I had to tell my 2 sons that their cousins had been murdered, right? My sons were 9 and 6. My dad was involved in Major League Baseball.
Yeah.
So the news goes out on ESPN, and now all their friends are going to know. And, I had to tell my 9-year-old son and my 6-year-old son, what do you say? How do you say it?
Yeah.
What do you tell them? And then a year later, we went to the cemetery, and as we were walking back to my truck, it was just my 2 sons and I. And my now 10-year-old son says, "Could I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." Um, and he said, "Do you think it hurt, when my nephews were shot in the head?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what I hope is that as Marines, I think we take great pride in knowing how to do, our professional lives when they get hard. We know how to do that. We're not very good in the valley of the shadow of death, though. And so to me, the next things I want to write about and talk about are, if General Lejeune was in the valley of the shadow of death, what would he say? And you mean to tell me that we can do the lagoon at Tarawa. We can do Iwo Jima. We can do the Chosin Reservoir, for God's sakes. But the Valley of the Shadow of Death is too hard, and for us. And my response is my inner Lance Corporal. Fuck that. The only question is
Yeah.
how the fuck do we do it? That's the question. You know, it's like it's not a question we're going to win. It's how much blood we're going to spill. Okay, well, why can't we take that same mentality into the Valley of the Shadow of Death? Because there is a path, and then why can't we teach the nation how to do that? It comes from our beautiful, relentless, fuck you Marine Corps culture. You know, all the crazy shit that it is. So yeah. Yeah. So but fiction is easier. I have to say it. And I'm toying, and I was talking to Tim Lynch about this, about,
Oh, him. He's really good. I've read some of his stuff.
well, you
He's
know what, Tim's
really
doing,
good, yeah.
he's
Yeah.
doing great stuff. And
That's it.
as his friend, I'm really proud of him.
Mhm.
But writing a series of children's books, based on, you know, little kids who, what they do is they help people who struggle, right? And so they have these little adventures, or,
Mhm.
you know, most of the time very mundane things
Yeah.
that happen, but somebody's devastated by it and they help them. And so I said, no, to me, we could pick people's stories and we'll just childize them. We'll put them into little kids' terms.
Mhm.
And he said, whoa. I said, and it's all fiction, so we can make stuff up. And he said, I like that. So we'll see what happens. When do you think, have you started writing yet?
I
Where are you
have.
in this whole thing?
I have. I've got a ways to go, but it's uh
Is writing easy for you?
not really.
Uh-huh.
Every once in a while, like if someone says the word CIA, suddenly 900 words of insults come out. But not
Uh,
really. You think it would be, but when you're trying to write a book, it's such a big thing that you have to remember to put it piece by piece. Otherwise, you just, you're like eating an elephant.
yeah.
Uh,
No,
but
it's hard. It's hard work.
yeah,
I liken it to, do you remember the pencils we used to have in our pencil cases when we were kids, in those clear pencil cases, that little thing, then you'd stick the yellow pencil, the yellow number
yeah,
two
yeah, yeah,
pencil in
yeah,
it.
yeah,
And
yeah.
to me, that's what writing a book is. It's taking that pencil and it's turning it and turning it and turning it and turning it
Mhm.
and turning it and turning it until you get it to where you need it to be, that you would look at it and say, I'll put my name on that. And
Yeah,
it's an awful lot of work,
yeah,
I'm probably like you, Grant. I'm very proud of, you know, being able to write a book. And
yeah. It's yeah. I'm glad I did. The second one, it's actually a spy book, actually.
really,
Yeah, because I had actually written a draft of one, and earlier, one of the editors read it and
when
said,
does it take place?
uh, this one takes place, it's more contemporary. You write about what you know, so it has Japanese yakuza and Chinese spies
Where
and
is it set? Is it set in the
um,
Pacific?
yeah, like Asia, the
There's
Pacific.
got to be just
Uh,
beautiful Asian spy women.
Oh, nothing but yeah. Yeah, that's the basic thing. Yeah, it's yeah, nothing but that. But in fact, when the editor looked at my first one, which they actually, if it all goes well, this new one, they said, could you just write a new one, and we'll use that as the introduction to the second one.
What?
But the one of the complaints in the first draft I wrote for the first story, which took place in Africa mostly, was they said, well, there's not enough women in it. You know, so, so I'm not, how do you write that stuff? But I mean, there aren't many, but so, but I'll have more in this one.
Well, let's hope so.
Yeah, yeah,
Let's
we'll
hope
see.
so. All
Mhm.
right. Where are you, how long you be around and where you headed
I'm
next?
around for a while. I'm not sure just yet. Yeah, I just don't know. Yeah, but I'll on the East Coast a fair amount these days. I've decided if you want to be invisible, like if you, I mean, like there's a stealth coating, live in Hawaii. And it's not like people elsewhere think of, oh, Newsham, yeah, let's
Oh,
give him a call. It's like you don't exist. So
me.
Well, it's
right?
other than you. That's
Other
why
than
it's
me, right?
yeah. It's just other than you.
Yeah, but again, you endeared yourself to me because you said shit that was true.
Right. Well, but
And
you think my
when you're trying to do this, most people come on are high function conformists. They're not, I mean, they could have a mouthful of shit. It could be leaking out of the side of their mouths, and you say, "Do you have shit in your mouth?" They would go, "Mm-mm." Like, are you sure? Because it looks like it's leaking out the side of your mouth. Mm-mm. And so and people ask me like, "Hey, why don't you have people that are on active duty come on?" I'm like, because they're the worst fucking interviews. They're not gonna say shit, right? You need to get
yeah.
maybe retired people, and most of those aren't going to say shit either because they don't want to get sideways with whoever employs them. And so you got to find people, rare people that are probably retired, but they're truth tellers, right? And if you're a truth teller, you normally get shown the door in any bureaucracy, whether it's a school district or what, because the person who ascends to the top is the high functioning conformist.
Yeah.
They're not disagreeing with a whole lot of people. All those people that were in the audience at Quantico when Pete Hegseth gave his little speech, high functioning conformists, right? They all lived through the DEI stuff, and yeah, it's a great idea. We're all about it. We'll do it, right? It wasn't a great idea. They shouldn't have been all about it. They shouldn't have done it, right? And but they did. Why? Got to get promoted.
Yeah.
Got to get promoted.
Yeah.
And so anyway, all right, Grant. Well, first of all, I appreciate you coming on. And now that I'm done, the only thing I've left to do is audiobooks. And so I'm doing a little bit of that. Although I'm doing a lot of that, but I have time to do this now, so I will do more of it. So I appreciate you hopping on with me, and
Sure.
safe travels. Welcome home,
I
and
did
good
have one
luck
question. I had one question.
good luck in Virginia with
Okay.
all the aristocrats there.
Oh yes, I am out at my estate
I
at
was just
the.
at VMI.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
good.
my friend
Yeah,
Dave
yeah,
Furness is now the
yeah. Oh,
superintendent
no,
there.
he's good. Yeah,
Yeah, a
he's
truth
such.
teller,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, that's what I was going.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was what I was getting at.
yeah,
But yeah, I know of him. Put it that way.
yeah.
But
So what's your question?
okay. Do the names Nestor Shylock and Augie Donatelli mean something
Of
to you?
course, they're
Okay.
umpires.
Yeah. Okay. Because they probably some of the first names that I ever knew. And,
Why
so
would you
anyway,
know them? I knew them
because
because on the way home from the stadium,
uh-huh,
I would hear those names,
yeah.
right? When they screwed shit up.
Oh,
And
because I would hear it.
and then
Yeah.
Bruce Freming, who just passed away, I
Oh,
think
yeah.
last
The
week.
big guy. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
big guy. His nickname was Spanky from from Spanky and our
Yeah.
gang,
Yeah.
right?
The portly fella, the portly young boy. Huh? No, because I would hear it like on senators'
And not
broadcasts.
only
Yeah.
portly, but he was an extremely short fuse,
Oh,
right? He was
okay.
like Spanky.
Okay. But
Both those things.
yeah. Yeah. Anyway, I just had to ask because there couldn't be more than like three people on the planet who would immediately recall those names.
I know who Mark Belanger is.
Oh yeah, batted 197, but he could field.
He could pick it.
Yeah.
He could pick it. The blade.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So
Okay.
anyway.
Well,
All
that
right.
was my question. Those are my questions.
All right. All right.
You've
Well,
answered them correctly.
thank you.
I
That
fig I
for everybody.
figured I figured you would.
Umpires in Major League Baseball back in the day for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Right. Back when you could be a big guy and be an umpire. They don't do that anymore. They're a little bit more fit now. So anyway.
Yeah.
All right, Grant. Well,
Okay.
thank you so
Sure.
much. And
Pleasure.
travel safe.
Okay. Thanks.
All right.
Bye-bye. Bye.
See ya.
You're listening to All Marine Radio on the All Warrior Radio Network.